Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning, students. My name is Irni Zarifka. I am one of the lecturer of Faculty of Medicine, Universitas 11 Maret. I came from Department of Cardiology and Vascular Medicine, Universitas 11 Maret. Students, this is one of a video from Skills Labs, and this is for medical or educational purposes. On this video, you will learn about basic ECG interpretation. Well, you can, however, learn from the manual book which already been given to you all from the beginning. One of basic objectives is to make ECG less scary. Hence, 3 important clues will be given to you all. Let's start about the electrocardiogram definitions. The ECG is a graph that records the electrical activity of the heart. This is the basic that you must know. About the amplitude and also the time or durations, I will give it to you all after this. From the left-hand side, you can learn that there are 12 leads of ECG, and they all represent the 360 degrees of our body. The ECG itself will come like this, the right-hand side. There is a P wave there, PR interval, KRS complex, ST segment, QT interval, and as well as T wave. This is the standardization of the ECG. The speed has to be 25 mm per second, and the amplitude of our ECG paper should be on 10 mm per 1 millivolt. And if we talk about the small box will represent 0.04 seconds. And the definition of large box is 5 times 5 of the small box. Let's begin with cardiac conduction systems. Student, there are actually 4 cardiac conduction systems. Sinoatrial node, and then surrounding of the AV node, and then atrial, and the last but not least is the His-Purkinje system. On this video, we only learned about sinoatrial node as one of the automaticity, the most strong automaticity in our heart. Once sinoatrial node make a electrical activity, then the electrical activity will spread evenly on the right atrial and also left atrial through Bachmann's bundle. And then all of those electricities will come into the atrioventricular node. After the atrioventricular node process those electricities, the electricities will come and spread through the bundle of His and spread evenly again into right ventricle and left ventricle through bundle branch. And then finally, the electricity will come into the Purkinje system. If we talk about the factor of the electricity, this will become a first clue of the ECG. Well, anyway, I will again repeat my explanation before. This is the SA node or sinoatrial node that will produce an electricity and then spread it evenly to the right atrium and then left atrium through the bundles Bachmann. And then the electricities will come to the AV node and processed there. And then after that will go along the His bundle and spread evenly again to the right ventricle and left ventricle, and then the Purkinje system. Well, actually, the main factor of the electricity itself is from the right upper hand side to the left lower hand side of our body. This will become a first clues. Students, when the SA node spread the electricity, these contractions will lead to a movement of the ECG and become the P wave. Right after that, Those electricities will come to the AV node, surrounding AV node, and AV node, and the AV node itself will have a decremental activity. And then there are no activities at all at our heart, then it will represent the PR interval, which represent the asystole wave. Furthermore, after the AV node process the electricity will come to the His bundle. And from His bundle, this electricity will spread evenly to the right ventricle and left ventricle. And after that, both ventricles will contract. And the contraction itself will make a QRS complex. After that, when the electricity is finished, then there is no such movement again in the heart. This will represent the ST segment. The second principle of law of the ECG itself is when there is a depolarization wave, so the deflections will be positive. But on the other side, when there is no depolarization wave or against the depolarization wave pattern, so the deflections is negative. And it will make a QRS with negative complexes. For the interpretation of the ECG itself, students, you can learn from your manual book. There are 15 aspects that can be valued from this interpretation of the ECG. For basic rhythm, the normal basic rhythm is sinus. The sinus itself is defined as main electrical impulse from SA node, as like what I said before. There are two things that should be there. The first of all, P wave have to followed by QRS complex, and then P wave have to be positive at lead 2 and negative at lead AVR. So students, we will learn about the terminology of the sinus or basic sinus rhythm. It is the normal sinus rhythm, sinus bradycardia or tachycardia, and then sinus arrhythmia. The sinus itself has a frequency of 60 until 100 times per minute. This is the example of the ECG. For sinus arrhythmia, this is considered a normal ECG for certain people. This is a physiological normal and often happen in a young, healthy individual. This is the example of atrial fibrillations. The atrial fibrillations in this ECG, we cannot appreciate the P wave. And then for atrial fibrillations, the ECG will be irregularly irregular. Move to the heart rate. How to calculate heart rate? Student, we can use the equations here. Heart rate, beat per minute, is calculated with 300 divided by number of large squares. The example is like this. We can appreciate that there are 4 big squares, big box between the QRS complex. So 300 will be divided by 4. Then the heart rate here for the example is 75 beats per minute. Then how to calculate the heart rate when the heart rate is irregular? So the example is like this. We can use the 6-second rule during irregular rhythm. We have to calculate the QRS complex between the 6 rules. Or else we can use the minimum and maximum QRS durations. Or else we can calculate the QRS, or else we can calculate one by one. The minimal heart rate for the irregular rhythms, we can calculate with the maximum distance from QRS to QRS complex. For the maximum heart rate, we can use the minimum distance from QRS complex to QRS complex. And then we can report the irregular heart rate frequency with minimum until maximum heart rate. There are 2 cardiac axes, the frontal plane and the horizontal plane. The frontal plane, we know it is the cardiac axis diagram. There is AVR, AVL, AVF, lead 1, 2, and also 3. The cardiac axis diagram becomes the third clue of the ECG. The normal axis is around the negative 15 degree until positive 105 degrees. If you have the arrow like this, or even like this, so those also considered as normal cardiac axis. This is the normal cardiac axis. And secondly, for cardiac axis, there is a horizontal plane. What we can learn here is V3 or V4 as a transitional zone of the ECG. If the transitional zone moves to the left or to the right, so the cardiac axis of the horizontal plane is abnormal. Student, let's learn about the wave. First of all is the P wave. This represents the atrial depolarizations. For the normal value, the amplitude of the P wave is less than 0.3 millifarad and the durations less than 0.12 seconds. When we talk the ECG is normal, so we talk about the normal sinus rhythm, which have to be positive P wave at lead 2 and negative P wave at AVR. This is the example of the normal P wave we can learn from the lead 2. Aside from that, we can learn the abnormality of the P wave. If there is an enlargement of the right atrium, so we will appreciate the tall P wave. Otherwise, when we see the M shape of the P wave at lead 2, so we will appreciate that there is an enlargement of left atrial. This is the true example of the ECG. Students, you can make a note at lead 2. There is a M shape of P wave, and we call it as P mitral. Otherwise, when we evidence at lead 2 a tall P wave, so we talk about the pulmonal P, which represent the right atrial enlargement. Moving forward to the PR interval, the normal range is 0.12 until 0.2 seconds. This is the example of the normal PR interval. But however, students, we sometimes evidence a very narrow of the PR interval. This will be evidence of the pre-excitation syndrome, or we call it as WPW syndrome. On the other hand, when the prolonged PR interval depicted here, so we will talk about the AV block. When we talk more about the AV block, there are 3 degrees of the AV block. The first one is the first degree AV block. First degree AV block will have a prolonged PR interval, which is more than 0.2 seconds. But anyway, on this ECG of first degree AV block, all of the P wave would be followed by QRS complex. A bit different from first AV block, it is the second AV block type 1, or we call it as Wenckebach type. There is a progressive prolonged of the PR interval. I will show you like this. The PR interval is like 0.18 seconds, and then it will prolong here more than 0.2 seconds, and then there is a P with blocked QRS complex, or we know as a dropped beat. So if we evidence a progressive prolonged of the interval, PR interval, and followed by a drop beat, so this will called as a Wenckebach type or Mobitz type 1 or second AV block type 1. Another form, second degree AV block type 1. It is the second degree AV block type 2, or we call it as Mobitz 2. There is no such a prolonged of the PR interval, but there is a dropped bit here. Finally, the total AV block or third degree AV block. Students, we can appreciate that there is no connections between P wave and QRS. The P wave rate is different with the QRS complex rate. So this is the total AV block. Moving forward to the KRS wave or KRS complexes, the definition is a ventricular depolarizations. The normal duration is 0.06 until 0.12 second. And for normal amplitude is depend on the lead itself. And also we will appreciate the Q wave, the normal Q wave, which will have a dip less than a third of the height of the R wave. This is the nomenclature of the QRS complex. The first negative deflections is the Q wave. And the first positive deflections, we call it as an R. We call S wave as a second negative deflection. Other than that, students, we will have the designations of a different QRS patterns. We talk about the small q if the dip of the q itself is less than a third of the height of the R complex. And then we talk about the pathology q or a big Q here if the dip of the q itself is more than a third of the height of the R wave. And they are all the different designations of the QRS pattern. And then this is the SD segment. If we talk about the SD segment, so we will appreciate the orange graphic here. If the graphic is above the horizontal line, so we call it as elevation of the SD segment. Other than that, if the SD segment is below the imaginary red line here, so we call it as SD depressions. When we talk more about the SD depressions, we will appreciate that it has three different views. The downsloping SD depressions, upsloping, and also horizontal SD depressions. The downsloping and horizontal SD depressions is much more sensitive towards ischemic or infarct of the myocardium. The definition of a T wave is a deflection that produced by repolarization from the ventricle. This is the different designations. This is the different pattern of the T wave. The A T wave is a normal T wave. And other than that, we can appreciate the electrical imbalance or the hypertrophy of the ventricle, or also the ischemia or infarct of the myocardium. Lastly, the U wave is usually followed the T wave. It is because of the slow repolarization of the ventricle. QT interval can be calculated from the ECG. It is the duration of electrical systole. The normal QT interval for men is less than 0.42 seconds, and for women is less than 0.45 seconds. Students, as take-home points, you can learn about the ECG itself by yourself very easy. Easy if you don't memorize it. Finally, thank you for your attention, student. I hope you can learn about the ECG interpretation well on this video, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.